Welcome to the China Angle. I'm Simone Gao. This week, U.S.-China tensions escalated following the U.S. government's new policies on the autonomy of Hong Kong and their classification of Chinese social media apps, including TikTok and WeChat, as potential national security threats. With the Trump administration's signing of the Hong Kong Autonomy Act, an act condemning the Chinese regime for eroding Hong Kong's freedom, and for the first time rejecting most of Beijing's territorial claims in the South China Sea. The administration assumed a much more forceful stance, creating a perfect storm for the Chinese Communist Party. President Trump's stance is a striking and dramatic shift from just a few weeks ago, when he refused to sanction the Chinese officials involved in the Xinjiang mass detention camps. At the time, he claimed that doing so would have negatively affected his trade deal with China. What would prompt the American president to initiate this public change in position? Might it have something to do with the CCP's cover-up of the coronavirus? In this episode of the China Angle, we will examine these questions and assess where U.S.-China relations are likely to go from here. We begin with a look at the events unfolding over the past week. Our story begins in Hong Kong, a city once considered a harbor of freedom and prosperity. It has now become just like another city inside mainland China. 1 week ago, the chilling effect of the new national security law allowing the mainland government to deport anyone to China for trial and imprisonment was deeply felt as police arrested pro-democracy protesters throughout the city. In response, citizens who were active on social media quickly deleted their accounts or old posts in fear of being criminalized under the sweeping new law. What does that mean for Hong Kong? It means national security and even freedom itself will be solely defined by the Chinese Communist Party. It will mean that loss of freedom will become the heart of the experience living in Hong Kong, with the National Security Office enforcing that law from its position in the center of the city. In response to that new law and to the public outcry about it, on July 14th, President Trump signed the Hong Kong Autonomy Act and issued an executive order ending Hong Kong's special treatment status. This reduces Hong Kong's trade rules to those applied to the rest of China, a change expected to have profound impact on the economy in Hong Kong. The most critical change outlined in the executive order is the freezing of any U.S.-based assets linked to the Chinese officials responsible for eroding Hong Kong's autonomy. Specifically, the bill grants the president 90 days to identify the Chinese and Hong Kong officials who helped the Chinese Communist Party contravene Hong Kong's autonomy. The Trump administration must then inform Congress of any foreign financial institution that knowingly conducted transactions with those officials. The U.S. will impose sanctions on the listed individuals and financial institutions within a year. This allows the U.S. to impose significant power in CCP's policies by granting them the authority to judge whether or not a person was involved in the attempt to end Hong Kong's autonomy. It also allows the U.S. to define and measure what constitutes an end to freedom in that city. The broad scope of these sanctions will tie the hands of many Chinese officials, making them reconsider their parts in facilitating the CCP's oppression of Hong Kong. They simply have too much to lose. The priority of corrupt Chinese officials is the obtaining of American citizenship, the holding of American assets, and the ability to send their children to America for high-quality education. Those priorities have become the social norm of the elite in modern China, leaving those Chinese officials caught violating the autonomy of Hong Kong without the advantages U.S. connections can bring. As we said before, the Trump administration initially held off the sanctions against the Chinese officials over the human rights violations carried out on Uyghur Muslims. Trump said it was because the U.S. was in the middle of a historic trade deal with China. Now, that trade deal seems to become an afterthought. Not only that, more actions were taken. On July 6th, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo told Fox News that the Trump administration is considering banning Chinese-owned social media apps, including China's largest messaging app WeChat and the popular social media video app TikTok. Both have come under intense scrutiny for engaging in information warfare against the U.S. White House trade advisor Peter Navarro reaffirmed this on July 12th when he told Fox News that he expected President Trump to take strong action against these social media apps. Now Trump's chief of staff, Mark Meadows, has announced that actions on the proposed ban could come within weeks. This needs to happen quickly. If it doesn't, user data collected by TikTok and WeChat will continue to be gathered by Chinese government officials, given that these companies are obligated to work with Chinese authorities in intelligence collection efforts. Recently, in an exclusive report by the Epoch Times, former Chinese internet censor Liu Lipeng confirmed this looming danger. In the article, Liu revealed that he had been interviewed for a role in the monitoring and policing of videos posted by international users of TikTok. The recruitment notice specifically stated that the role involved reviewing globalized videos. These revelations coincide with rising concerns that the app could be used to spy on and censor American users. But these cybersecurity threats to the U.S. don't just come from Chinese social media apps. U.S. corporations such as Google, Microsoft, and Apple have been willing to collaborate with the CCP for short-term profits. In doing so, they have, knowingly or unknowingly, assisted the Chinese regime in imposing massive surveillance and censorship on the Chinese people and on the rest of the world. Their participation with the CCP has not gone unnoticed by U.S. government officials. On July 16th, Attorney General William Barr criticized the U.S. tech companies for kowtowing to the Chinese regime, singling out Apple as a particularly powerful example of the double standard elite tech firms hold in their treatment of the U.S. government versus the government in Beijing.
Public safety and privacy are not mutually exclusive. We are confident that technology companies are capable of building secure products that protect user information and at the same time allow for law enforcement access when permitted by a judge, as Apple had done willingly for many years and others are still doing today. Many of the technology companies that advocate most loudly for warrant-proof encryption in the name of privacy rights are at the same time willing to accommodate authoritarian regimes when it serves their business interests. For example, it has been widely reported that Apple has worked with both the Communist Party of China and the Russian regime to relocate data centers to enable bulk surveillance by those governments. Apple also has reportedly disabled features and applications on iPhones used by pro-democracy advocates, thereby facilitating censorship and oppression. If technology companies like Apple are willing to oblige the demands of authoritarian regimes, they certainly have no excuse for failing to cooperate with rule-of-law nations that respect civil liberties and privacy rights and have judicial safeguards.
Barr was referring in part to Apple's recent removal of privacy apps from its Apple Store in China and their discontinuation of the Course News app after the Chinese government complained about its coverage of pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong. Their announcement that they will move some iCloud data to servers located in China is even greater cause for alarm. These actions and the actions of other U.S. tech companies should be reviewed alongside the review of Chinese social media apps. Whether the Trump administration will make anti-CCP a 2020 campaign theme remains to be seen. What we are seeing is unified actions across a variety of sectors of the U.S. government in order to confront the Chinese Communist Party. The question is no longer whether the U.S. will take actions, but rather how far the U.S. is willing to go. This leads to our second highlight of the week, the South China Sea. For the first time, the U.S. strengthened its position on China's maritime claims in the region, an issue the U.S. has previously been unwilling to involve themselves in beyond general condemnation. On July 13th, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo issued a formal statement declaring Beijing's claims to offshore resources across most of the South China Sea to be completely unlawful, as is the CCP's campaign of bullying to control the region. This statement represents the U.S. government's shift from condemnation to official rejection of these claims made by the Chinese regime. Pompeo's stance reaffirms a 2016 ruling by an international tribunal. That ruling was a response to the Philippines' challenge of China's claims in the waterway, leading to a ruling that rejected China's maritime claims related to the Spratly Islands and the neighboring reefs and shoals. The Chinese regime refused to recognize that ruling. If the Chinese regime was unwilling to recognize a binding decision from an international tribunal, why would we expect Pompeo's remarks to have more impact? I believe these remarks demonstrate a clear warning that the U.S. is prepared to directly confront an aggressive Communist Party should they continue in their present course. This stance is far more likely to impact the CCP's action in the South China Sea than was the ruling of the International Tribunal, because the CCP has much more to lose in a direct confrontation with the U.S. Alternatively, the added pressure from the U.S. rejection of the CCP's claims could lead to a regional war on the South China Sea, impacting not only the parties directly involved, but also Taiwan, which is situated across from the South China Sea. On July 15th, Zero Hedge reported that China's PLA is actively staging military exercises across from the Taiwan Strait. These exercises are designed to simulate a takeover of Dongsha, the Taiwan-controlled islands just 400 kilometers away from Taiwan's southernmost point. This is an aggressive strategy we have seen before. In 1996, China initiated a similar crisis in the Taiwan Strait after staging an assault military drill. After President Bill Clinton deployed 2 powerful U.S. aircraft battalions, China discontinued its aggressive posture toward Taiwan. At the time, strategic analysts speculated that the Chinese decision was evidence of a realistic assessment that it could not overcome the U.S. ability to defend Taiwan. Now the Chinese government seems to believe differently. In May, the CCP's mouthpiece Global Times warned that the PLA could easily turn any drill into an actual invasion of Dongsha or even Taiwan itself. If we assume that statement to be prophetic, is the Chinese regime willing to risk war with the U.S. to subdue Taiwan? While we cannot be sure of the answer to that question, one point seems clear. The CCP may have a stronger motive than ever to attempt to take control of Taiwan. Xi Jinping needs external conflict to divert people's attention from the internal crisis in China and to strengthen his weakening power. He would do well to consider, however, that the United States has a stronger drive to defend Taiwan than they have in decades. The U.S. seems to be shifting to a much stronger position on China. Sadly, the pandemic may be the likely cause. President Trump's initial intention was to negotiate a trade deal in order to correct the unbalanced U.S.-China trade relations. Today, that trade deal has become irrelevant, in large part because of the pandemic. Tragedy can prompt reflection and a change in priorities. Witnessing the ways in which the Chinese regime may have caused and then hidden its culpability in a pandemic that has now taken more than 600,000 lives across the globe has caused the U.S. to begin to decouple themselves from the Chinese regime. This is a positive step forward that may ultimately save lives and freedoms in the U.S. As Bart put it, the ultimate ambition of the Chinese Communist regime isn't to trade with the U.S., it is to raid the U.S. I believe that the way to win this battle is to help the American people understand this not as a war about the economy or technology, but about our freedoms and fundamental way of life. This has been the China Angle. I'm Simone Gao. Thanks for watching and see you next time.